Welcome, Shona. Thanks for joining us. Shona has been the MSP for Dundee City East since 2003. She served in the Scottish Government as both a Minister and Cabinet Secretary for Health and Sport prior to being appointed to her current role as Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice, Housing and Local Government in spring this year. Shona, a huge welcome to this conference. We just hugely appreciate you finding the slot to be with us. We sometimes think this new way of meeting online makes it easier for all of us, but I think what we all do is actually just cram much more into our diaries, don't we? So thank you so much for just making this slot happen, really, in your diary. So I'm going to pass over to you, Shona. You're going to address this conference and we'll be back to join you shortly and invite some questions from those that are joining us in the audience today. So thank you.
Well, thanks very much, Maggie, for your introduction there, and good morning to everyone, and welcome to the final day of the Homeless Network Scotland's annual conference. I hear that the event has been a great success over the past 2 days, and I'm really delighted to be able to join you on the final day, and I look forward to your questions later on. The annual World Homeless Day will take place this Sunday, so it's a good time to reflect on our progress on tackling homelessness and, of course, to consider the challenges we still face. The pandemic has absolutely shown us just how important it is to have a home, and has highlighted what we can achieve when we work together and we get out of our silos and we have a can-do attitude. And I'm pleased to share with you that I have this morning reported to Parliament on the progress of our Ending Homelessness Together action plan, and I'd like to take the opportunity to share some highlights with you. This annual report describes the steps that we've taken in partnership with local authorities and third sector partners towards ending homelessness and rough sleeping in Scotland. And I think it's worth noting that, as Crisis reported in their Homeless Monitor published last week, progress is primarily positive, with the rates of core homelessness in Scotland substantially lower than that in England. And I think that's something that we should hold on to, but while recognising that more work needs to be done. The fact that the number of people sleeping rough in our city centres has fallen to record low shows that it is possible to end rough sleeping in Scotland, and I really want to express my gratitude to all those involved for making such great progress during the most challenging of times. The last 18 months have made us appreciate what home means more than ever, and have strengthened the sector's drive to realise the ambition of a safe, warm home for all. We know that preventing homelessness from happening in the first place is, of course, the most effective way of ending homelessness for good. And that's why we've committed to introducing new prevention legislation during this parliamentary term. Effective prevention means helping people at risk of homelessness much, much sooner. It also means considering people's circumstances in the widest sense, including their well-being, health, social care, employment and welfare needs. It means all parts of the public sector recognising their role in preventing homelessness, and this requires collaborative working from across the Scottish Government and, of course, with our stakeholders. I believe that Scotland is leading the way in our commitment to end homelessness, and we've committed an additional £50 million over this parliamentary term to tackle homelessness and rough sleeping. However, we can't afford to be complacent, and we have to continue to work with partners to continue our efforts to end homelessness. We have to maintain momentum with the declining numbers of people rough sleeping. We need to improve efforts to address the inequalities that were exposed during the pandemic. We have to get better at joining up services, data and decisions, accelerate the shift to rapid rehousing to reduce the number of people stuck in temporary accommodation. And we need to deliver on our promises to introduce new homelessness prevention legislation and a new right to adequate housing in Scotland. Our commitment to end rough sleeping remains a critical part of our Ending Homelessness Together action plan, and we're seeing strong progress towards the elimination of rough sleeping. The use of hotels as emergency accommodation was an effective temporary measure in response to this crisis. However, it's not sustainable or appropriate in the longer term. We must ensure that the gains that we made during the pandemic continue as we focus on our economic and social recovery. I want no one to return to rough sleeping, and I know this will take continued action and partnership work, and I would like to commend the frontline teams who work so hard on a day-to-day basis to ensure that people are offered the support that they need. Of course, we still have too many households in temporary accommodation, a situation exacerbated by the coronavirus pandemic. Settled accommodation with the correct support continues to be the best response to homelessness and is a priority for this government. The pandemic has placed a burden on all local authorities, and I know they share our ambition to ensure that stays in temporary accommodation are short term, particularly for families with children, and we're working with them to achieve this. I'm pleased to tell you that we've established a working group to produce new advisory standards for temporary accommodation, and that it's meeting for the first time this morning. The group will help to identify any legislative changes required and advise how the framework can be applied and regulated. The establishment of this working group aligns with a significant change in temporary accommodation legislation. The expiration of the unsuitable accommodation order, temporary exceptions, means that, as of last week, local authorities will be in breach of the order if any homeless household stays in unsuitable accommodation for more than 7 days. The aim of this legislative change is to reduce the amount of time all people experiencing homelessness can spend in unsuitable accommodation. And this is in response to the detrimental impact that lengthy periods of time in unsuitable accommodation can have on people who live there. We've committed to taking action to realise the right to adequate housing in Scotland. In March of this year, the National Task Force for Human Rights Leadership published 30 recommendations for a new human rights framework for Scotland, and the Scottish Government has accepted all of them, and a new multi-treaty human rights bill will be introduced later in this parliamentary term. Our new human rights bill will incorporate the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, together with 3 further UN human rights treaties, into domestic legislation, and this includes the right of everyone to an adequate standard of living, including the right to adequate housing. We will be the first UK nation to incorporate the right to adequate housing into domestic law, marking a new era in Scotland's human rights journey, and I'm sure many of you will want to be involved in the development of that bill. We remain absolutely focused on a rapid rehousing and housing first approach, and are investing £37.5 million to support councils to prioritise settled accommodation for all through the implementation of rapid rehousing transition plans and the commencement or scaling up of Housing First for people facing the most significant challenges. Housing First is an important part of our rapid housing approach, offering settled accommodation and wraparound support to people with multiple and complex needs. The vast majority of local authorities are now providing or plan to provide Housing First in their area. In the Pathfinder areas, Housing First has provided 545 tenancies to individuals since its launch, with a tenancy sustainment rate of 84%. No one has been evicted from a Housing First tenancy. That is quite a remarkable achievement. And building on the successes of the Housing First Pathfinder, we are now seeing the upscaling of Housing First across Scotland. And that's because the evidence shows that a Housing First approach works. If people are provided with a safe, secure place to call home, they will be able to engage with the services they need. And by taking a person-centred and no wrong door approach, we can better respond to people's individual needs. Our partners in the Change team, a group of people with lived and frontline experience of homelessness, continue to provide us with thought-provoking insights and access to the lived experience of homelessness and practice to inform our policy development. And that's why we're very pleased to recently have gained a member of the Change team on secondment to our homelessness unit, and we're already benefiting from his knowledge and expertise. The Change team has set out 4 new directions to end homelessness in Scotland. The 4 themes, People First, At Home, No Wrong Door and Good Vibes, are adapted from our Ending Homelessness Together action plan and have been used to engage with people across Scotland in a conversation about how change can happen. The team is publishing its own report later today, taking the temperature on progress towards ending homelessness in Scotland. And this report draws on the online national conversation that they conducted during lockdown. And I'm looking forward to reading this report and continuing our valuable work with the Change team. Of course, Housing to 2040 sets out our vision for housing over the next 20 years, takes the longer term view. Good quality affordable housing is essential for tackling poverty and inequality, creating and supporting jobs, stemming depopulation, ensuring we meet our energy efficiency and fuel poverty targets, tackling the climate emergency and making sure we have connected, cohesive communities to live in. And to deliver this vision, our strategy included a target of 100,000 affordable homes by 2032. Excuse me. This ambitious target has now been extended by 10% due to the cooperation agreement with the Scottish Green Party, and we're investing £3.5 billion in housing over the next 5 years to support this work. Between April 2016 and June 2021, we delivered almost 43,000 affordable homes, over 29,000 of which were for social rent. So a lot of good work, but more to be done, and we need to keep the momentum going of the affordable housing supply chain. My vision is for a future where homelessness is predicted and prevented where possible, where there's no need for night shelters, where people are not left in destitution, and where all parts of the housing system respond in a way that promotes equality. My ambition is for everyone to have a safe, good quality, affordable home in the place that they want to be. We've achieved so much in the last year, down to your hard work, in spite of the pandemic, and I believe we can end homelessness together. So let's seize the opportunity. I hope you all have an enjoyable final day of the event, and I very much look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Good morning. Can you hear me, Cabinet Secretary? Good morning. My name's Martin. I work with the rest of the team at Homeless Network Scotland. Thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. As Maggie said, we're incredibly grateful to you for making some space in what must be an absolutely packed diary, just looking at your job title apart from anything else. So we're very grateful to you for joining us this morning. What we're going to do now is we're going to take a Q&A and get some thoughts and some questions from members of the audience at the conference today, and hopefully we can do that for sort of maybe around 10 to 15 minutes, depending on what comes in, and then after that I'm going to be joining up some of the rest of the sections of today for the morning. So it's a pleasure to be here. The questions themselves, the way to get them lodged is to use the Q&A section of the chat box. So you'll see on the right hand side of your screen that there's in the chat there's the main chat, which is for the whole conference, and then there's also a Q&A section as well, and that's the place that we would like people to put their questions, if possible, for the Cabinet Secretary. So I'm just going to double check that we're not getting questions. I think we are getting some questions in the chat actually, which is fine. As I say, if you could get your questions into the Q&A section, that would be appreciated. It just helps me to keep it all together. So there's one question. First of all, Cabinet Secretary, if I could ask you, what part do you think the wider community can play in ending homelessness? Let's kick off with that one, and then we'll wait for the others to come in.
Thanks, Martin, and excuse my stinking cold this morning. I'm trying to avoid coughing fits. I think the community has shown through the pandemic that it can respond in a very supportive and empathetic way to the citizens and fellow citizens around them, and I think that in some ways brought out some of the best of community responses. You saw people really coming together to try and keep neighbours and the most vulnerable safe. So that says something, I think, about how people view their responsibilities as citizens. Now, I think communities we need to harness that and encourage that. And I think communities can help break down the barriers and stigma around homelessness. I think by engaging and by understanding and by explaining why people end up homelessness. I think there used to be I think the stigma has gone a bit, but there's still stigma there, that we need to make sure people understand that anyone can end up in that situation. And, by doing that and breaking down the stigma, I think we can change attitudes and create a more supportive environment. So I think the more we can do that to raise awareness, and there's some great frontline community organisations that I think are spreading the word and joining the dots and really trying to do that in the communities that they serve. So I think we should harness that and do more of it.
Thank you, Cabinet Secretary. Just sort of following up on that slightly before I move on, do you get a sense maybe that the pandemic and everything that we've been through collectively has maybe changed people's attitudes slightly to those that are struggling through tough times?
I think it has. I think there are a section of the population that weren't potentially captured in the need for support and the need for universal credit, for example, suddenly come into a system that they knew nothing about. And actually, many of them are pretty horrified by it in terms of the level of resources that families are expected to survive on. I'm not even going to get started on the universal credit cut this week because it'll just make me angry, and I'll talk about it for the rest of the session. Suffice to say, it's one of the most brutal decisions and one of the worst cuts we've probably seen since the Second World War. And I think what it shows is that we have a deeper understanding, and I think a lot of people now have more sympathy and empathy for people who are in that situation because they've experienced it more themselves in terms of trying to live on universal credit. So I think we should harness that, and I think we should continue to try and build that community response, the community understanding, because that all helps in the backdrop of attitude towards folk who as I say, anybody can end up in that situation.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes. So we've got some questions coming in the chat now. I'll take one first of all. This is from Ishbel Smith. Ishbel says, what's the hardest choice you've had to make in context of homelessness recently? And what is the hardest choice that you think you will have to make in the next 6 months?
Well, we've all got hard decisions to make in government. Resources are tight, really difficult. However, what I've been clear about is in leading the work to meet our interim child poverty targets, that has to be the overriding priority across the whole of government. And I've tasked my fellow cabinet secretaries and ministers to look and turn over every element of their portfolios to look at how we can further prioritise the tackling of child poverty, which of course links very much into homelessness, temporary accommodation, all of the issues that are related. And I think it is therefore about, in tough financial times, we can't do everything. So we have to prioritise what we do. And for me, that means focusing on tackling child poverty, of course, linking to homelessness prevention as well. So that for me is, and I don't know if it's a tough decision, it's an obvious decision, and one that I'm pushing my government colleagues to do everything they can within their portfolios to join the dots and make sure we redouble our efforts.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and having such arguably a wide portfolio as you do must be helpful in that respect, I imagine.
It is. We can join the dots within my portfolio on housing, on local government, on social security, on all the anti-poverty programmes, but that's not enough. It's not just my responsibility to tackle poverty, it's every cabinet secretary, minister, local government, third sector. It has to be a Team Scotland approach to tackle poverty. I can't do it on my own, and neither can the Scottish Government.
Of course not. Absolutely. I'm going to take another question now from Ashley. So, Cabinet Secretary, what do you think the challenges will be around delivering a rapid rehousing approach? And for what those are, how can we look to overcome them?
I think we have to keep the momentum going of the rapid rehousing approach. I think there's been really good progress. The rapid rehousing welcome centres that have been established are getting away from the night shelter model. So there's been a lot of progress that has happened. I think the challenge will be just making sure that momentum is kept going across the whole of local government. I mean, I don't see local government are absolutely in lockstep in wanting to do this. Every local authority has a rapid rehousing transition plan to make this happen as quickly as possible. We just need to make sure that the momentum and priority continues to be given to this, because we know it works. And when something works, you keep the momentum and you keep the foot on the pedal to make sure it delivers. And that my role is to oversee that and to have those conversations with local government to make sure that every single council is working with us to deliver that.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. I'll take another question here. This question's from Janine. What are the opportunities for joining up policy agendas? And this sort of goes back actually to what we just touched on before, but the idea of joining up policy agendas across health, housing, social care, both in terms of strategic planning and also funding, that kind of integration that I think many in the third sector and government as well are keen to see more of. Is that the case?
Yeah, I mean, what I described earlier around the tackling child poverty and meeting our interim targets is only going to be able to be achieved if we do that. So we have to look at our collective resources, and we have to look at what we spend them on currently. And one of the difficult things is perhaps stopping doing some things or slowing some things down in order to do more on other things and do other things more quickly. That's always a tough one, and it's a tough ask of fellow cabinet secretaries and ministers, but it's absolutely what we need to do. And in tough financial times, and I worry about this winter, we have a situation where we have rising fuel prices, food prices, national insurance contributions going up, the cut to universal credit, all of which will put incredible strain on families that are already, many of whom are already struggling. So we need to play our part. It's not just our responsibility. We can't mitigate everything that other governments do, but I'm very clear that there are some short-term supports that will need to be put in place to keep people safe this winter. But beyond that, we need to take a strategic view of making sure we collectively use our resources in the most effective way on the key priorities that we have.
Thank you. And there's another question come in here, Cabinet Secretary, which sort of builds on that. This question's from Eleanor Lee in Glasgow. Good morning, Elle. The Housing First approach involved working with trauma, addiction, mental health. How do you see the new investment and the commitment to rapid rehousing supporting a multidisciplinary approach to complex experience effectively? Yeah,
well, I think that's why it's worked. That 86% of people are maintaining their tenancies, and of course that this is a group of vulnerable folk who, many of whom have been on a revolving door of failed tenancies before. So the fact that this has worked is down to the wraparound support and understanding what the issues are, whether it's addiction, whether it's mental health, and of course addiction, the roots of addiction are more often than not rooted in trauma, sometimes childhood trauma, and being able to get to the root and support people when they're ready to help them through some of that is really the key to helping people move on from where they are to the life that they want to lead. It's not just about bricks and mortar and putting a roof over someone's head. It's about the security that comes with having a safe home, but it's also about the wraparound support, and that's why it works. What we need to make sure is that becomes the model. That's the default. That's how we do our business from now on, because we know it works.
We know it works. And that was the theme of the conference yesterday, and we heard from some great speakers about the value and the impact of good quality support and the difference that makes to people's lives. So yes, absolutely. So we're, as I say, if people have got questions for Cabinet Secretary, we've got a couple of minutes left probably. You can put them in the Q&A section. I've got one that I wanted to ask you actually, which is more of a general question, but obviously we're a few months into the new Parliament now. You've had the privilege of being in Parliament for a number of years now. This must be an exciting time at Holyrood, that sense of starting on a new journey and all the opportunities that brings. What's that like?
I was obviously a child when I was first elected. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting having seen the Parliament over 20 plus years and it evolving in different ways, changing in some ways, perhaps not changing in ways it needs to change. We still have too much kind of partisan politics, I think. But I, you know, being in this job is the most privileged and exciting opportunity to try and build a consensus around, you know, what we need to do to tackle poverty, to tackle homelessness and the underlying causes. I think by and large, there is a consensus about that outcome. That the difference will be around the how. You know, when you see differences, for example, around drug policy, my view is that we need to be bold and very ambitious around and try new things. Clearly, what we've done to date hasn't worked in the way that we would want. And you know, so I think we need to be bold, and that brings risks. It means that you're maybe trying things that are new, and no doubt, you know, you would be held to account if it doesn't work. But you know, I think it is an era where we need to be bold. And I think there's an appetite from most parliamentarians to be bold and be bolder than we have been in previous parliaments. And I think that's an opportunity to be seized upon.
That's great. Well, I can see that your colleagues are nudging this session along, Cabinet Secretary. I know you have somewhere else to go next, of course. So any other questions people have, if they please do submit them, and we'll pick that up. We'll get these into the Cabinet Secretary's office, and we can hopefully maybe come back to you. But for now, Shona Robison, Cabinet Secretary for Social Justice, Housing and Local Government, thank you very much for joining us this morning. We are incredibly grateful for your time. It's been a pleasure having you here.
Well, thanks, Martin. I've actually got to get to Parliament to answer a question, but please submit your questions in writing. We'll get a response to you. But it's been great being here with you this morning, and thanks for having me, and enjoy the rest of your day.
You're welcome, and you too.